Morning, everybody. Welcome to another Wednesday. It's Law and Legitimacy. And while you were sleeping last night, well, maybe not while you were sleeping, but while you were preoccupied with the business of making a living, big events took place in the world, and the 2024 electoral season just reached the boiling point. Donald Trump announced on Truth Social that his lawyers informed him they are the recipient of a target letter from the federal government. We'll talk about what that means and what it portends for the possible and likely and probable prosecution of Donald Trump on crimes related to the January 6th riot. Also, and I think related, certainly thematically, if not otherwise, contextually, an announcement of a breathtaking prosecution in Michigan. I think it's 17 senior GOP officials have been charged in Michigan with various counts of electoral fraud or fraud relating to a false electors claim. The claim is that on December 14th of 2020, while the votes were being tabulated for the Electoral College in the Michigan General Assembly or Legislature, these individuals, men and women, met together to come up with a different slate of electors, so-called false electors. And then, of course, there's Charles Barkley running his mouth about Bud Light, and Dylan Mulvaney still causing a stir with respect to AB Bevs. So there's a lot to talk about. Let's jump in with Trump. But first, good morning, Mike.
What's up, Norm? How are you this morning?
Good. What's the weather like there in North Carolina?
Hot.
Oh, well, that's too bad. It's
hazy from the Canadian wildfires. It's funny. We were clear last week, and then who knows how weather patterns work and how air really moves. But, it's been hazy all week. It's been really hot. We haven't had any rain, so your boy has had to turn his sprinkler system on and make sure that the grass doesn't die on me, because, you can't have a zero-turn mower and pay for gas to mow brown grass. You know what I mean?
I get that. So, just so you appreciate the difference between where you live and where I live, we're up tucked on the Canadian border. We've had a little haze this week and rain. Our road washed out this week. I live down a dirt road. The neighbor and I had to do some work to kind of restore things. But it's now 65 degrees. We'll have a high of 73. My neighbor and I were out the other day, and it got to be in the high 70s, low 80s. He says, when it gets this hot, I stop for the day. And so I'm thinking he'd last about 9 nanoseconds in North Carolina.
That's absolutely right. But it's hard to believe this time of year, as a young, spry Michael Boyer, 15, 16, 17 years old, I was doing 3-a-days in the July and August heat, and, black helmets and black practice jerseys. That was the good old days,
Man, that good old days. They sound kind of nuts to me. Donald Trump. So Donald Trump received a target letter. And now everybody is not everybody, but now it's widely reported that he is almost certain to be indicted and charged with federal offenses related to January 6th. Need I remind you, you heard it here first. We called this back in April. And I'm surprised it's taken this long. The press accounts yesterday suggested it could be in 3 or 4 days. I would suggest to you that it is imminent, that he's likely to be indicted soon. But what, some ask, is a target letter? The federal system requires withdrawn. I think I'm in court. I'm on vacation and I still think I'm in court. Under federal law, you have a right to be indicted by a grand jury. That is, to have a group of ordinary citizens reach the conclusion that there's probable cause or good reason to believe that you've committed a crime. And that is how a federal criminal prosecution is supposed to be indicted under the federal constitution, or initiated under the federal constitution. Many states also have grand juries, and they have their own idiosyncratic grand jury procedures. The right to be indicted by a grand jury is one of the few constitutional rights, one of the few rights enshrined in the federal constitution that has not been incorporated or applied to the states. Thus, in many states, my home state of Connecticut included, there is no right to a grand jury indictment. People are arrested pursuant to an information. That is, their information is provided to a judge in the form typically of an affidavit. A warrant is signed for the person's arrest, and the process begins. In the federal system, you can agree to waive a grand jury indictment, Sometimes the feds will arrest somebody quickly, a so-called on-site arrest, or they'll go to a magistrate with a criminal information, sign it to begin the process, and have a person apprehended. That person, however, then gets a right to choose whether to have the case indicted to the grand jury. And a typical move among federal prosecutors is to wink at the grand jury requirement, have a person arrested under an information, and say, look, if you want to plead to the information and waive the right to grand jury, we'll work a deal out with you that is less onerous than what will happen if you make us go to a grand jury. If you insist on your constitutional rights, we will indict. And when we indict, we'll include more serious charges and you'll face more serious consequences. In the Trump case, nobody.
For those of you, because you referenced it, but I want to make sure it gets a little bit of press here. For those of you who were not watching us in April,
what else could you have been doing?
Look, I don't pass judgment. You're here now. That's all that matters. For those of you that didn't catch the stream in April, it was late April. Norm and I talked about this, and I clipped about a 4-minute clip of that yesterday and posted it on Law Pod Daily's Twitter, and I've got it on the screen here. So if you'd like to go back and perhaps relive that moment, you can see the NBC article that we have there on the screen. You'll recall that Norm and I have consistently talked about 4 potential causes of action, 2 of which are ongoing. The third here, J6, is what I personally believed would be the penultimate charging decision. That I didn't believe that it was going to come before anything occurred with respect to the Georgia election. So it seems as though this has outpaced that. Norm, I don't know if you have any insight on why that would be, but certainly my expectation was that anything related to January 6th, the Department of Justice bringing charges, the same or similar of which they brought against the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, I believe that was going to be sort of the penultimate happening in this case.
Well, penultimate is next to the last, ultimate is last. So if Georgia hasn't gone yet, the feds go first, penultimate, it might be right still.
I guess I'm thinking of the ultimate occasion. Whether he's convicted on that.
Yeah, quick rewrite. No, but so let's talk about the mechanics of a target letter. Let's talk about what's going on in Washington. I talked to a few sources yesterday who have resources in the building in Washington, D.C., where the grand jury is seated. And there has been a lot of activity in the Trump grand jury in the last couple of weeks, and people close to the ground in D.C. believe that an indictment is forthcoming. And so Trump receives a target letter. There is no requirement that the feds send a target letter. Indeed, I would suspect in most cases they do not. You just get a knock on the door, you're indicted, or you get arrested. Do you want to waive your grand jury right? A target letter is a letter from the Justice Department formally notifying someone that they are, as the name of the document suggests, a target, a focus of a federal investigation. And typically the letter says, we are investigating you and believe that you have committed the following crimes: maybe seditious conspiracy, wire fraud as to Donald Trump, a different species of fraud relating to the so-called false electors claim. And by way of this letter, we're providing you with formal notification and an opportunity to discuss this issue further if you so wish. Here are the federal, you have a right to a lawyer. You or your lawyer may want to contact us. Here are the federal prosecutors handling the case, and they provide contact information. Typically, a federal a target letter, at least for lesser mortals than Donald Trump, target letters are usually delivered in person. And they are delivered by 2 FBI agents, one who's going to witness what the other one said, and the witness will fill out the obligatory 302. That is a pre-printed form on which he or she will record his observations of the event. If you're sitting at home one day and you just came in from mowing the brown grass in North Carolina and you're having a beer, because after all, you're a beer industry lawyer, and there's a knock on the door and 2 federal agents are there and there's a target letter, you're like, what? Oh my God, what am I going to do? And of course, they're there to help you. They'll discuss with you your options, and many people give their cases away at a confrontation when they receive the target letter because they're rattled. And that's what the FBI plays upon. It's hard to get to Donald Trump given the Secret Service cocoon that he lives in. So his lawyers received the target letter. And maybe Jack Smith is gambling that Trump is so filled with himself that he will decide to come to the grand jury, waive his right to remain silent, and tell them what he thinks. I think that would be a catastrophically bad move for the president or the former president. But he's not asking me for advice, and based on what I see of his conduct in these cases, he's not listening to much of anyone's advice, although he has thus far behaved in court. So a target letter is not an indictment. It's not a promise to indict. It's simply an indication that, look, we're interested in you. We're interested in you because we believe you've committed some crimes. These are the crimes. Come talk to us. It is to be distinguished from another way of looking at people. A person might be a person of interest or a subject in a grand jury investigation. A subject is somebody they want to talk to, somebody they think has relevant information about a potential crime. You don't get subject letters, but you may be classified as such. A person of interest is somebody similarly that they're interested in talking to. They think they're not sure who that person is. And then there are just the rest of us that they don't particularly care about, except when they're surveilling us. So let's say Donald Trump is charged on a J6 charge. What charge would that be? I'd say there are three potential types of charges. There could be a wire fraud claim, and that would be similar to claims made against mortgage appraisers who overestimate the value of a house to secure a larger mortgage for their client and perhaps get a kickback. What would that case look like? All of Donald Trump's advisors were telling him that there was no hope, that the election was stolen, but he kept asserting to the public at large that it was. And then he raised funds. He raised money in a fundraising pitch using interstate commerce, and that could be wire fraud. There could be the false electors claim, and the emergence of the Michigan action against the 17 Republicans in Michigan suggests that this may well be a focus of the federal grand jury, that Trump knew that he was going to lose, that the only way to win was to have a series of slates of electors certified by Mike Pence and have him count those votes for Trump rather than Biden, knowing that there was no lawful process supporting these electors. Trump conspired with others to create them. There could be a claim of seditious conspiracy, that he deliberately wound and stoked and fired up the crowd with an aim that they use force against the authority of the United States government, and that his speech on the mall was a part of a deliberate and concerted effort to overcome the election by any means possible, including the use of force. That would mirror the charges waged against the Proud Boys. And based on what I saw in that trial, I never saw evidence of a plan. I never saw evidence of a conspiracy. Prosecutors argued that the conspiracy could have been formed instantaneously at the moment the first barricade was breached, and this was enough to break federal law. It was enough for a D.C. jury who convicted. Whether it'll be enough on appeal remains to be seen. But Trump is likely to be charged, and now gossip in D.C. is who's going to be charged with him. It's unlikely that he'll be charged alone. And so the smart money seems to be
it's hard to have a conspiracy with oneself,
Well, unless you are, Walt Whitman and you are I contain legions. Hey, Norm 2.0. What do you want to do today? I don't know. Ask Norm 3.1. I'm not sure.
Not impossible.
So John Eastman, his lawyer may be charged. Rudy Giuliani may be charged. What's her name? Jen Ellis may be charged. So the legal advisors around him and people who helped orchestrate these various plots and schemes may be the targets. Roger Stone would be on the cusp. And then there are organizers of the event just below Trump. Nobody believes that organizers of the event will be in this Trump or this round or tranche of indictments. So expect that. But, here's the deal, Mike. I think if Trump is indicted, I don't think it's going to change much in our American political landscape.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping we would get to, because there's two ways to skin that cat, right? The first is necessarily procedurally, how quickly can something like this proceed, and what are the implications on his ability just legal ability to run for president, let alone viability as a candidate? I think those are obviously two separate questions. But first, can you lob some thoughts about that?
Yeah, on the ability question is easy, and I don't know who is got Trump's ear right now, but fortune favors the bold, the Latins used to say. And Trump is nothing if not audacious. So he's somebody in his war room ought to be running the following hypothesis. What do we do if we're indicted in July of 2023? One thing you do is you kick the can down the road, delay, file motions, and make sure that this thing isn't heard until after the general elections in 2024. Hope like hell Trump is elected and he pardons himself and you deal with all that. The bolder move, because I don't know that Trump is electable. I think he's obviously going to be or likely to be the candidate for the Republicans in 2024. I don't know that he can capture enough votes to win, and he's going to need to appeal to people who are not yet committed. And one way to do that would be to claim the victim card and to say that this is a piece of weaponization of the federal government, that he's a populist voice and elites are seeking to silence him. And the only way for you to fight back is to help him fight back. So he stands in court and says, I'm not waiving my speedy trial rights. He has a right to be tried within about 70 days, I believe. I can't remember the exact number. I think that's it. And so one thing that, and clearly this is a file that has been well lawyered, well papered. There aren't going to be many or any surprises in the material he receives. So he should spend some of that mega fortune on putting together a trial team that says, I'm good to go. And you know what? I want a speedy and public trial. Because my Sixth Amendment rights say I have a right to a speedy and a public trial, and he should file a motion to have the courtroom proceedings televised, and then he should make the trial on this indictment into a campaign event and take his case immediately to the American people. If a DC jury convicts promptly, and 61% of viewers say, I don't know, then what you've done is you've provoked an even broader crisis of legitimacy. You've called into question what goes on in the swamp and whether it really is justice. And he has the opportunity to make a direct appeal to the American people. I've seen no signs of such audacity in Mr. Trump yet, and it surprised me. Instead, he has followed the sort of customary legal strategy in cases of some complexity, and that is delay. If in fact he is indicted this summer, as I suspect he will be, he should be looking for a trial in October or November. So as far as his ability to run, Mike, there are no impediments on that. If he was convicted of sedition, there's a 14th Amendment clause that might make him ineligible for office. And so that raises very serious questions. He runs for office. He is convicted, or he's charged. He tries the case. He gets certified as the nominee, and then he's convicted. Does that mean that he must be removed from the ballot? One untested proposition of law is if that removal takes place immediately or only after the conviction is upheld on appeal. So we could be in a very anomalous position where he's been convicted by a jury, but he's got a right to appeal. And therefore, although there's a final judgment, the case has not been fully adjudicated. And he let's say he then goes to the November election with the appeal pending. And let's say come January of 2025 or 2026, he loses the appeal. He makes a run to the Supreme Court. They say, nah, you're toast. Now we'd have to remove him apparently from office, or he'd have to challenge that provision to the Constitution. So there's great constitutional issues at stake in this. But from a political perspective, he needs to, in my opinion, he needs to step up his game. He's been uncharacteristically quiet. His legal team has been uncharacteristically passive. And this is a man who, if he intends to make a serious run at the White House in 2024, needs to light it up and needs to light it up now.
Yeah, he and Biden both are. It seems as though they recognize that they have a hardened base of voters. And for the time being, it's not obvious to me that they are going to let it ride, as the kids say. Particularly with respect to the likes of Ron DeSantis, his campaign is an absolute dumpster fire at this point. He's crumbling in real time. Trump hasn't had to do anything specific to allow that to happen. Ron DeSantis has just had to be the I guess personality-less nerd that he is, and he's done that all on his own. Then we've got Vivek obviously surging, and then now there's plenty of talk about Michelle Obama, and I still am in the camp of Gavin Newsom being the challenger to Biden. But I'm curious as to whether there are, what contingencies have to come to fruition in order for those items to unlock. It's not clear to me right now that the Democrat National Convention won't just run the carcass of Biden again under the current circumstances.
Well, I think, unfortunately, especially if Trump ends up indicted, and especially if Trump does not aggressively attack the indictment and transform the trial into a campaign event, which, again, Donald, if you're listening, transform your J6 trial into a campaign event. What have you got to lose? I mean, playing cautious isn't going to get you anywhere here. But if it's Trump versus Biden and Trump is facing charges, I think Biden runs another basement campaign. I mean, what has he got to lose? Anybody but Trump.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Here's the thing that I worry about, Mike, and I worry about this a lot. Lost sleep over it last night. Dawn McNeil points out Eugene Debs ran from prison. He didn't run but he wasn't charged with sedition. He wasn't charged with a disqualifying event, and he did get several million votes as a socialist, but he didn't win, obviously. But here we have a situation where the nation's chief executive could well be charged with wire fraud, could well be charged with sedition, and a significant percentage of the population doesn't care. In almost any other presidential race, those charges in and of themselves would be disabling, and everyone would move on. So what accounts for the stickum as to Donald Trump? Why does he remain relevant in the lives and in the heads of so many? And I say that we haven't really moved that far from 2016. He remains a canary in a coal mine. He remains a source that attracts a lot of attention by people who've lost confidence in, quote unquote, the regime, in the status quo. And that signals a tremendous sense of legitimacy, of a legitimation crisis. Donald Trump is now likely to double down, or can double down, on being the outsider. And will his campaign further deepen the divides in this country? And are we reaching a breaking point? I mean, let's play the game, Mike. Suppose Trump won. What then? I mean,
before we get to that, BTL asks a fantastic question. Thank you, BTL. She says, in the chess match aspect, if the Supreme Court sided with Trump, let's say the scenario we just ran, Norm, reaches the Supreme Court, would that not be the result necessary to, quote, pack the court for Democrats?
I would think so, but then will they have the votes?
It's obviously playing into the narrative that's been building around court packing for sure, right? But I think that what perhaps BTL is saying is not necessarily will they be able to pack the court at that instance. I think what I'm saying is that whatever the Supreme Court decides, because right now the court is a 6-3 conservative majority, I think that on all matters related to this, you and I, reasonable minds can agree that the application of law to Trump under the circumstances is less legitimate than it is. It's not as legitimate as it should be, right? And that's what deepens these divides. I actually don't think the divides can get any deeper. I'll get back to that in just a second. But a result in favor of Trump from the Supreme Court, I believe, is what BTL is saying would lay the foundation for the court packing agenda that has been advanced. I think it would take something as radical as that to actually shift the sands enough.
It might, and I think that's a great point. And then, of course, the question would turn to who controls Congress, and the ability to create justices and so forth. As regular listeners know, we've been talking about John Locke this week, because I'm rereading the second treatise as part of my pitch of his second treatise on government, as part of my pitch to new law students to read classics before they get into law school, so that you're not overwhelmed by the trivia or by the false sense of philosophical sophistication that law school professors are going to give you in the name of diversity, inclusion, and whatnot, and equity, and all that jazz. Get down to fundamentals, and what is it that makes government possible? What is it that is the rule of law? And Locke comes very close to adopting or to foreshadowing Max Weber early in the second treatise when he says, what makes a political society is an agreement that a group of individuals will have the ability to use force and to enforce the law by use of force and to compel punishment of others. But he goes on to talk about consent as being the foundation of government, and basically says that the people always have and retain the right to withdraw their consent from government. This is a natural right, that government doesn't stand over and above us as some sort of self-perpetuating eternal thing to which we owe allegiance. Rather, it's something that we can evaluate on a day-by-day, year-by-year, case-by-case basis. And if we lose confidence in government, if government comes to a point where we look at it and say, no more, it was created to serve my person and my property. That is to create conditions in which I can flourish. If we reach the conclusion that the government hasn't done that, can't do that, won't do that, we have the right to withdraw our consent. And that's a momentous occasion. And it's not as though that gets put on the ballot box some November. And, we agree. Be it resolved, we are returning to the state of nature on January 3rd at 12:01 a.m. That's not how it works. Basically, I think how it happens is how it's happening in the United States now and how it happened in the 17th century in England before John Locke wrote the second treatise. We talked about the divisions in English society that were largely an incident or a result of the religious wars and differing conceptions of how best to worship God. Marxists will look at the emergence of a class, of a new class of merchants, the bourgeois or merchant class, that began to explode feudal society. Whatever the cause, ultimately, you see people begin to feel that government doesn't serve them. And they turn away from government, and in that turning away, they provoke a challenge from government. How do I enforce my laws if the people won't obey? Well, you might decide to more savagely punish dissenters. Is that what's happening with respect to these sedition trials? More charges just this week in Connecticut, for example. A man was charged with seditious conspiracy for assaulting a cop back on January
and I've seen the same here in North Carolina, and another from South Carolina. We're seeing sentences handed down for additional defendants that are still there fighting.
And so that's one response, that government gets desperate, claps down, and it pushes away the very people that it's trying to persuade to obey. And maybe those people just say, I've lost confidence in the government. And I think that's what Donald Trump represents right now. I think Donald Trump, the canary, the song that this canary is tweeting from the coal mine is, the people have lost confidence in government. And it's not that Donald Trump is some sort of charismatic genius that we want to all go to for inspiration, but he has become the focal point of that discontent. And so as this election progresses, it's possible that 2024 will become a far more fractious and violent period than we have hitherto seen. And whether this fractiousness and violence will yield something like civil war, candidly, Mike, in my view, is an open question. You look at the culture.
I think about this from a campaign messaging perspective. I'm not exactly sure I understand what Trump's campaign messaging is in a concise way, other than the constant resistance to to the application of force from the existing government. And to that end, it seems obvious to me. We got questions in the chat here from BTL, from Dawn. Dawn's asking, when will the Supreme Court become involved? And it gets me thinking that if we start to indulge the game theory of if this then this, if this then this, what are the likely outcomes? These contingencies here and there. Why would Donald Trump not simply say to the nation that they are willing, when I say they, those opposite me, those committed to my demise by hook or crook, are willing to burn everything down in that name? Everything. They are willing to light the American experiment on fire, and they are willing to watch it burn at your expense and to put me on that stake.
Well, he can say that and he can play victim, and that will mobilize voters. But the
That doesn't
failure,
necessarily say that he's a victim. It says this is the reality. In my opinion, he's saying
well,
that
yeah.
to a motivated voter base would
But
be
here's the
to say,
problem.
because this is we keep Norm. One thing that drives me a little nuts is that you and I we unpack these more topical events and we track these cases and we pull things open, and it's almost to a detriment of a distanced view, of a broader view of the whole. Each of these things in its own right can be validated or invalidated for having merit or lacking merit, but it is more than the sum of its parts. At this point, it is obvious to me as a 33-year-old practicing attorney, married with a son, running a business, running a podcast, running another business. It is obvious to me, knowing what is true in the world, that there is a coordinated effort, and we haven't even gotten to the Michigan electors issue, but this is just another example of the sort of nitpicky bullshit. And I'm sorry, but the nitpicky bullshit that we've become accustomed to with respect to anything that is not, and sorry for the paradigm reference, sufficiently to the left on the political spectrum. And it's as if in the pursuit of Trump, there is a part of politics right now that wields all of the institutional power, whether it's media, whether it's the executive branch, whether it's legislative, whether it's culturally, right? In our educational institutions, from the bottom up, they wield this. They are riding the zeitgeist of this authoritarian, deeply seated subconscious desire of the person to be governed. They are riding that, and they are willing to erode everything about our American Republican experiment in the effort to achieve those ends. That's a compelling argument to make, and it doesn't place him in a perspective of the victim, at least from
Well, here, I agree with a lot of what you say, but not all. I think the problem with Trump is that Trump doesn't really have a vision of the future. I mean, you look at Donald Trump and
So
you
give it
see.
to Vivek. Give that
Well,
vision to
but
Vivek.
one step at a time. One step at a time. I mean, right now we're focusing on Trump, and maybe Vivek is the guy who emerges from the ashes. But when I talk about Donald Trump playing the victim's role, what I'm criticizing him for is not having a vision of the future. You can say "Make America Great Again." That's really a campaign theme and a rhetorical flourish. What concrete steps will you take? What institutions do you favor? What are your philosophical commitments? And Donald Trump seems to be a mile wide and an inch deep. It's going to take somebody like Vivek Ramaswamy or his ilk to revive the Republican Party and create a new set of ideals and a counterweight against the hegemonic left, as you point out, against those forces that seek to move us in a direction that I don't think many Americans want to move. I simply, Mike, don't see Donald Trump as having a vision of the future. The reason I keep referring to him as a canary in the coal mine is I think of him as a potent signal. People are attracted to him not because they like him. They're attracted to him not because they believe what he believes. They're attracted to him because he reflects their anger, their sense of disconnection, and their sense of anything but now. And
I don't disagree with that, and I think it's perhaps a little more refined. But directionally, I think that you're right over the target. And there are many people that follow us and listen to us that will be voting Trump irrespective of what happens here. And that's part of the population that you referred to earlier in the stream.
Hell, to be honest with you, if I had to step into a polling place right now and pull a lever between Biden and Trump, I would pull for Trump.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to vote for some tap dancing corpse trying to shove DIE down my throat. I'm just not going to do it.
Well, I guess Don says Trump has a whole series of videos outlining his vision. Vivek is an exact duplicate. What is different? Don, what's different is that Vivek is a millennial. He's in his 40s, and he represents a newfound energy that comes from within, right? He is now. Trump is still 79 years old? Is he 79?
Well, and I don't see Trump as capable of building a team around him. Trump is
I don't want to sound like I'm just giving my vote to Vivek at this moment. What I'm saying is that there is a light around Vivek right now. And I think I spotted this early on.
Yeah, you
I
did.
think I'm probably one of the first people in your life, Norm, and many of you on this stream. I'm probably
No, you're not probably. You are. I never even heard of the guy. I couldn't pronounce his last name. I wasn't going to vote for a guy whose name I couldn't pronounce.
What is different in the vision? If Trump has articulated service as a path to citizenship,
I missed the message.
exactly.
If Trump,
So what's different is that Vivek is actually putting solutions to perhaps the vision that you think that they shared, Don. And I'm not saying that Trump is without. I'm like you said, put in the voting booth today. It's Biden and Trump. It's Trump. Easy. That's not a decision. That's a reflex. That's a reflex, right? But what we're talking about right now is that if again, it's game theory. If we are concerned with the legitimacy of our institutions, and if it is more likely than not that Trump exhausting every effort to avail himself of his innocence, right, in all of these various respects, is going to destroy everything that we're seeking to protect. This is a conversation. I'm not saying no Trump. Again, don't hear what I'm not saying, but this is a legitimate pathway to the future of governance in our country, is to understand what are the outcomes that exist based on what we have available to us in the moment. And that's why
Trump, Trump again
is nitpicky bullshit. It's a bunch of nitpicky bullshit. At some point, you have to stop playing that game.
I think Trump, and we may have had a near miss, Mike, you and I, because I'm not sure we're saying the same thing about Trump and his defense of these cases. My view is if he's charged with insurrection, he should defend the case now and not defend the charges, but defend a vision of America. Because I think that what made January 6th possible was a sense by many Americans that they were disconnected, that in a Lockean sense, they believed their government had betrayed them. There is a narrative out there that says, and I've fallen into it from time to time, you're still prosecuting J6 people who got prosecuted for interstate conspiracy to commit arson in the summer of 2020, when mostly peaceful protests resulted in billions of dollars of burning across the country. And, some social media wit yesterday responded to me saying, well, what evidence is there of conspiracy? I'd say the same evidence that there was with respect to the guys at J6. People got upset about the direction the country was moving. They got together, violence occurred, and then everybody got charged.
I don't know.
Now, if you're on the right, you got charged. If you're on the left, you get a pass.
I don't know, idiot. Somehow bricks just showed up at the intersections of every major city at various times of the night for people to conveniently pick up and use to destroy buildings. Fires started. People were being arrested in every major municipality in the country that didn't live there, that bust in from there. They had no idea. Did you know that law enforcement was able to actually effectively allocate resources because they could recognize when groups of people were lost? Because it was obvious that they weren't from where they were trying to torch. Right? So evidence, like, where's the evidence of a conspiracy for that? It's all over the place. Just open your eyes.
So the point is that there are contrasting vision, and this is the Lockean point in my view. There are contrasting visions about whether government is serving people in their persons and property, whether it reflects the sort of lives they want to live. And my view is there is a growing chasm in this country right now between differing versions of America. You've got, and I know yesterday I said, let's get away from left and right, and I'd like to. I think that's the path forward. But to take a rear view mirror look, there is the left and there is the right. And Donald Trump embodies and gives voice to a lot of people who are reacting against the direction they believe the country is moving in, this leftward tilt. And he's able to mobilize that rage and that sense of discontent. And I believe if he's smart, that's what he transforms the J6 trials into. And I don't know that he will be able to appeal to enough voters in the middle, if there are any anymore, to win the election. But he can mobilize his support, and he can try to point a way forward. Where we go from there, I don't know. I think that the number of challenges to the 2024 elections are probably already being researched and are getting ready to take place, because election denialism, in my view, Mike, and I know I overstate the case in your view, but election denialism is only in part a critique of the methodology of counting votes. It is driven largely, in my view, by a failure to and an unwillingness and an inability to accept by various parts of the population, the direction in which they think the country is moving. And until we can come to some sort of fundamental agreement and understanding in the United States about a common direction together going forward, our electoral politics are going to be dry wood on a hot fire. And one of these days, they're going to burst into flames. And I don't know that we're going to like the consequences. And so Donald Trump, he's got that lighter, he's got the tinder. And come the end of next week, I suspect he'll have another platform. Let's see what he does with it.
Yeah, and I know that we probably need to wrap this up. It's been fun this morning. We had two other stories that we really wanted to get to, but I think one of our followers on Twitter, I'm going to give a shout out to Peter Hance, sent an article from the Federalist. I think it was written in May. The title is "The Left's 2020 quote fake electors narrative is fake news." It references the 1960 presidential election between Nixon and Kennedy. So in lieu of trying to fully unpack the Michigan electors news with the Attorney General there announcing charges against 16 of the electors today, I think that perhaps we've got some homework to do, Norm, and we can perhaps do a comparative case study for now versus then. Article.
That works. That works. Photography. Locke believed only wealthy and landowners get representation. Well, Locke was focused on property, and he was writing in the 17th century. Universal suffrage was not a thing then. Although, interestingly enough, in the second treatise, he talked about the rights of women and the rights of women being equal within the household to the rights of men. Legally, they weren't, but that's a fair point and a fair critique of Locke. But the larger principle remains when you drive away the historical idiosyncrasies, and that is that he thought that the foundation of legitimacy was consent, and that the people had a right to withhold their consent and dissolve their government. And it seems to me that we are living in a Lockean moment, that our government may be on the cusp of dissolution, and we all have to ask, what's on the other side of it? What do we care to build together?
Well, we will pop, lock, and drop it then tomorrow. We'll also get into Charles Barkley and his apparent love for Bud Light. So stay tuned for that. I know, politics is a sport, so we can claim the mantle of sports, I guess, on today's stream with some of the keywords. But certainly wanted to get to Charles Barkley, and in particular, I think I sent you some stuff this morning, Norm, from the Beer Institute's compliance regime and their decision on a complaint that was filed by.
I got to ask you. I mean, the Beer Institute. That sort of sounds to me like
it's a big lobbying effort in D.C.
I mean, do they get together like, hey, give me another beer. Let's talk about this. I mean, what goes on at the Beer Institute?
This is as high level an organization as you can imagine. They're a D.C.-based trade organization.
The Beer Institute sort of sounds like the crack hospital. I mean,
No. The Beer Institute is not to be confused with the Brewers Association. The Beer Institute doesn't portend to be in the interest of craft or the small business. So this is really an accumulation of publicly traded companies, industry insiders, that kind of thing. And it is sort of a trade association geared toward lobbying on behalf of big beverage and big beer. So they had a complaint that they received from none other than Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Marsha Blackburn about Dylan Mulvaney's partnership with AB InBev on the Bud Light stuff. That body rendered a decision, so we'll get into that tomorrow as well. Thought we would use Charles Barkley's drunk golf-infused antics over the last couple of days to get that started. So anyway, Norm, I'm going to go play lawyer. I know you're going to be waiting by the phones for some more spiritually inspired calls for a criminal defense attorney for people's family.
Yeah, interesting call yesterday. I'm on vacation, but my office knows that if the call is serious enough, I'll take it. So I found myself on a telephone call having to explain to a distraught mother that Connecticut does not recognize demon possession as a defense to murder. Oh, what times we live in.
Well, what did she ask in response to that? That's the better part.
I don't want to. I've said more than I should.
Okay. Well, we are here every day, 8 a.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday. We're on Rumble Video, YouTube Live, and Twitter Live / Periscope. If you can't catch us live on any of those three platforms, you can always find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts. All that Norm and I ask is that you show up, just show up.
Yeah.
That's what life is about, showing up. So anyway, we'll be back here tomorrow because that's what we do. We show up. Norm, enjoy that clear Vermont air. I'm gonna get back to things here in Greensboro.
Works for me. Talk to you all tomorrow, folks.
See you tomorrow.